Hello everyone, this is the Therapist Gamer here. Welcome back to the Mental Health and Gaming channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the question, can you be addicted to video games? Can you be addicted to video games? People want to know if it's possible to be addicted to video games. I think the simple answer to that question is yes, it's possible to be addicted to video games. One of the things that you have to take into consideration when we're thinking about being addicted to video games is, what does it mean to be addicted to something? There's tons of definitions to the word addiction or addicted. Addiction, it's one of those terms that has lots of synonyms. One of the biggest ones that we use in a clinical setting is the word dependence. Dependence basically means two things. Dependence means that a person needs more and more of a substance or behavior in order to keep him or her going. And two, if the person doesn't get more of the substance or behavior, he becomes irritable and miserable, either through psychological symptoms or physiological symptoms. In order to be classified as an addict, you have to meet those two basic criteria. There's several guidelines that you have to take a look at that can act as warning signs for video game addiction. These guidelines are as follows. If you're finding yourself playing for increasing amounts of time, in other words, if your gaming is going from an hour or two a day to 3 or 4 hours a day to all your waking time is spent gaming, then that can be a warning sign that your gaming is becoming an addiction. If you're thinking about gaming during other activities like school or work, that can be another warning sign. Now, I'm not talking about just the every now and then thinking about that gaming session that you've got happening later on this evening. What I'm talking about is compulsively and obsessively thinking about that video game session that you have coming up this evening and every day. If you're finding yourself gaming to escape from real life problems, anxiety or depression, that can be another warning sign. We've taken a very deep look at gaming and its relationship to depression several videos ago. But one of the things that we looked at is the idea that if gaming becomes your primary escape from your depressive issues or from your real world problems, then that's a warning sign that things are starting to become problematic for you. Another warning sign is if you're finding yourself lying to your friends and family in order to hide your gaming. Lots of times, particularly kids, are going to minimize the amount of time they're spending gaming or sneak to game. We've talked about that several times. Or they're just going to flat out deny their gaming, but still be doing it behind the people's back. Then that can be a warning sign that there's a problem. Lastly, if you're finding yourself feeling irritable and frustrated when you're trying to stop gaming or when you're not gaming, then that can be a warning sign. If your mood improves immediately upon sitting down at the computer or the video game console, it's probably a warning sign that something's happening here that's beyond just normal stress reduction. So let's say you or your loved one meets these criteria and warning signs that we're talking about for video game addiction. What does that mean? What do we do about that? If you're concerned you or your loved one may be addicted to video games, then you can't dismiss it as a phase. We're beyond this is just something that this person is going to grow out of or be able to take themselves out of it. An addiction, by its very nature, is self-reinforcing, and it just doesn't go away on its own. That's not the nature of an addiction. It's going to take more than just persuasion in order to get that person to recognize their problem. That's one of the biggest issues with video game addiction, is that oftentimes it doesn't have the same consequences that, say, substance abuse addiction would have in terms of lots of lost money, in terms of the physiological aspects. You know, it's really hard to function if you're addicted to a substance, but you may be able to continue to function if you're addicted to video games. Because the consequences are minimal when it comes to video games, it's oftentimes difficult to get the person to recognize that there's actually a problem here. One of the things that I've recommended is that if you're concerned about you or your loved ones video gaming addiction, then the first thing that you want to do is you want to start keeping some documentation. You want to log when you or the gamer is playing and for how long you or the gamer is playing. If you sat down at your computer at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and didn't get off your computer until 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, log that time and keep a running record. The other thing that you want to keep documentation of is any problems or consequences that result directly from gaming. If you find that you failed a test because you didn't study because you were playing your video games, log that. Or if you find that your child failed a test or is failing a class because they're spending their time video gaming, you want to log that. You want as much documentation as possible of the direct consequences of gaming. And finally, the other thing you want to pay attention to and log is what happens when the gaming time ends. Does the person become irritable? Do you find your mood changing? Do you find yourself becoming angry or more frustrated or more irritable? Okay, so let's say you've done this and you've logged that time. What next? We talked a little bit about the tough part about showing a video game addict the consequences of their video game addiction. An intervention process might be necessary in order to convince that person fully that they've got a problem or an addiction. There are interventionists that specialize in video game addictions, but many of the interventionists that work with substance abusers will also treat video game addictions because the process and the principles are very similar. So let's say we've convinced your loved one or you've convinced yourself that it's time to get some help. What is that help going to look like? Well, here's the real tough part. At the present time, about all we know when it comes to video game addiction is that the only truly effective treatment for video addiction is the same as the truly effective treatments for substance abuse addiction. In other words, abstinence, complete abstinence from games, detox. It's unfortunate that this is all we have, but that's the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is if you're addicted to video games, the only way you're going to be able to live a healthy life is to completely eliminate the video games from your life. If you don't do that, your life is going to be miserable, just like with a substance abuse addict. Luckily, there are treatment centers devoted to video game addiction. They're starting to become more and more common, but they are still pretty rare, and they're expensive, just like a substance abuse treatment center. You want to find an inpatient treatment center for video game addictions. Outpatient treatment is not going to be effective with video games simply because you've still got access. An inpatient treatment center is going to get you away from that access, and you need that in order to have effective treatment. The other downside that you have to take a look at is insurance and finances. Unfortunately, treatment for video game addiction is expensive, and unfortunately, because it's not a recognized diagnosis in a lot of places, insurance is probably not likely to cover that treatment. So you're going to be paying out of pocket. The thing that you have to recognize is that gamers have to understand they're powerless over their addiction. And the only way to teach them that is to teach them real life excitement as opposed to online excitement. So the key is going to be replacing that excitement that the gamer finds in the online worlds and in the online games or in the games themselves. They have to start to find that in real life scenarios and in real life situations. So that's going to be the only way that this addiction is going to be broken. So there we have it. That's a simple breakdown of video game addiction. Again, I think the simplest answer to the question of can you be addicted to video games is yes. Absolutely. You can be addicted to video games. The unfortunate thing is at the present time, we don't have a lot of options when it comes to the treatment of video game addiction. It's a very new newly identified field and a newly identified problem, and it's going to take some time in order for effective treatments to be developed beyond the typical scope of substance abuse treatment. This has been the Therapist Gamer. I hope you like and subscribe to the Mental Health and Gaming channel. Thank you for watching. Questions or comments, please leave them below. If you find yourself struggling with possible video game addiction, seek help. There are resources out there. Thanks for your time, and this has been the Therapist Gamer. I hope to talk to you guys again very soon. Bye-bye.